Have you ever looked at your bank account late at night and asked yourself one uncomfortable question? Am I actually doing okay financially? Or am I secretly falling behind everyone else? It's a thought that crosses a lot of people's minds, even if they rarely admit it out loud. Maybe you see friends posting photos from expensive vacations. Maybe someone you know just bought a new car. Or maybe you scroll through social media and see people moving into bigger homes, wearing expensive clothes, or showing off the latest gadgets. And in the back of your mind, you start wondering, how are they affording all of this? Are they really doing better than you? Or does it just look that way from the outside? The truth is, most people have no idea what normal actually looks like when it comes to money. My name is Bryony, and I spend way much time thinking about why people who look financially reckless are sometimes better prepared for disaster than people who did everything right. If you've ever felt vaguely unsettled about how dependent your entire financial life is on one company, subscribe and hit. We compare ourselves to the people around us, but those comparisons can be misleading. Some people spend far more than they earn. Some are buried in debt. Others are quietly building wealth but never talking about it. So today, we're going to look at the real numbers behind the average person's financial life. We'll talk about income. We'll talk about savings. We'll talk about debt, spending, retirement, and net worth. And by the end of this video, you'll have a much clearer idea of where you stand financially compared to the average person. Some of these numbers might surprise you. Some might make you feel relieved. And a few of them might be a serious wake-up call. But understanding these numbers is important because once you know what the average looks like, you can start making smarter decisions about your own money. When it comes to finances, most people operate in the dark. They don't know what others earn, they don't know how much people save, they don't know how much debt is typical. And because money is such a private topic, it's rarely discussed openly. But imagine trying to improve in something without knowing the baseline. If you were training for a marathon, you'd want to know the average running times. If you were studying for an exam, you'd want to know the average scores. Money works the same way. Knowing the typical numbers doesn't mean you have to aim for average. In fact, the goal should usually be the opposite. But having a benchmark helps you understand where you currently stand. Are you ahead of the pack, behind it, or somewhere in the middle? So let's start with the number most people care about the most: income. Many people assume the average worker earns a lot more than they actually do. Because when we look around, we often see the highlights of other people's lives rather than the reality. But according to labor data, the median income for a full-time worker in the United States is a little over $1,000 per week. That works out to about $52,000 per year before taxes. Now, there are two important details hidden inside that number. First, this is individual income, not household income. That means it represents a single worker's earnings, not a couple combining two salaries. Second, the word median matters. Median means the exact middle. Half of workers earn more than that amount, and half earn less. So if you make around $52,000 a year as an individual worker, statistically speaking, you're right in the middle of the income distribution. But that $52,000 doesn't represent what actually ends up in someone's bank account, because taxes take a significant portion. Once federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, and other deductions are removed, many people earning $52,000 might take home something closer to $35,000 to $40,000 per year. When you divide that out across 12 months, the monthly income becomes much smaller, and suddenly the financial picture looks very different.
But income alone doesn't determine financial success. Two people earning the exact same salary can end up in completely different financial situations depending on what they do with that money. And that brings us to the next important topic: spending. If income is one side of the financial equation, spending is the other. Because even a high income doesn't create wealth if every dollar gets spent. On average, American households spend around $5,500 per month, which adds up to about $67,000 per year. And when you look at where that money goes, a few categories dominate the budget. The biggest expense for most households is housing. Rent or mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, utilities, and maintenance can easily add up to around $1,800 to $2,000 per month. That means housing alone can consume more than $20,000 every year. And in major cities with higher living costs, the number can be much higher. Food is usually the second largest category. Groceries, restaurant meals, takeout, and snacks can add up to around $600 to $700 per month for the average household. Transportation is another major expense. Car payments, fuel, insurance, repairs, and public transportation can total around $900 per month. When you combine just those three categories, housing, food, and transportation, you're already looking at several $1,000s each month, and we haven't even included healthcare, entertainment, clothing, insurance, subscriptions, travel, or unexpected expenses. This is one of the reasons many households feel financially stretched, even if their income appears reasonable on paper. Money flows out quickly. One of the biggest mistakes people make when comparing themselves to others is assuming that visible lifestyle equals financial success. But appearances can be extremely deceptive. Someone driving a luxury car might actually be making huge monthly payments. Someone posting vacation photos might have financed the trip on a credit card. Someone living in a large house might be carrying a massive mortgage. In other words, the lifestyle you see on the surface doesn't always reflect the underlying financial reality. In fact, many households that appear wealthy are simply spending every dollar they earn, and sometimes even more than that. Understanding this is incredibly important because it changes the way you view financial comparisons. Instead of comparing your lifestyle to others, it's much more useful to compare the underlying numbers. Income, savings, debt, net worth. Those are the numbers that truly determine financial health. If there's one lesson that becomes clear when you study financial data, it's this. The average person is not necessarily managing their money in the most effective way. Savings rates are often low, debt levels are often high, and many people reach retirement without nearly enough resources. But that also means something encouraging. You don't have to be extraordinary to do better than average. In many cases, simply avoiding the most common financial mistakes can put you ahead of the majority of people. Spending a little less than you earn, saving consistently, avoiding high-interest debt, investing for the long term, those habits alone can create a huge difference over time. But to really understand the full picture, we need to look at some other important financial statistics. And the next one might be the most surprising of all. How much the average person has actually saved for retirement. Because when people hear that number for the first time, it usually changes the way they think about their own financial future. So far, we've talked about income and spending, and one thing is already becoming clear. A lot of people assume the average person is doing better financially than they actually are. But the real eye-opening numbers appear when we look at savings, especially retirement savings, because this is where the gap between what people want for their future and what they're actually preparing for becomes impossible to ignore. If you asked 10 random people how much money the average person has saved for retirement, most guesses would probably be very high. Some might say a few $100,000, others might assume it's closer to $500,000. After all, retirement can last decades, so it seems logical that people would need large savings to support themselves. But the actual numbers are much lower. According to financial surveys, the median retirement savings for Americans is roughly around $65,000. And remember, that number includes people from every age group, from young workers just starting their careers to individuals approaching retirement. But there's an even more surprising statistic. About 25% of adults have no retirement savings at all. Not a few $1,000s, not a small account. Zero. That means roughly 1 out of every 4 people you encounter may not have any dedicated retirement savings. For many of those individuals, the plan for the future relies heavily on one thing: Social Security. Social Security was originally designed as a safety net, a way to help older adults avoid poverty after they stopped working. It was never meant to be the sole source of income for retirement, but for millions of people, it has effectively become exactly that. Currently, the average monthly Social Security benefit is around $1,500 to $1,600 per month. That equals roughly $18,000 to $19,000 per year. At first glance, that might seem manageable. After all, if someone owns their home and has minimal expenses, maybe that amount could cover basic needs. But for many retirees, the cost of living makes things much more complicated.
Healthcare costs increase with age. Food, utilities, insurance, and transportation still need to be paid. Unexpected expenses can appear at any time, and inflation slowly reduces the purchasing power of fixed income. For someone relying mostly on Social Security, the financial margin can be extremely thin. That's why many financial planners encourage people to treat Social Security as one piece of the retirement puzzle, not the entire strategy. Some even suggest planning for retirement as if Social Security might provide less than expected, so any benefits received later become a helpful bonus rather than a necessity. Another important detail is that retirement savings vary significantly depending on age. Younger workers usually have smaller balances because they're just starting their careers. Someone in their early 20s might have only a few $1,000s saved, and that's completely normal. But as people move into their late 20s and early 30s, savings ideally begin to grow. Many workers in the 25 to 34 age range have retirement balances somewhere around $10,000 to $15,000. By the time people reach their 40s, the expectation is that those numbers will increase significantly as careers stabilize and incomes grow. However, the reality is that many individuals still struggle to save consistently. Expenses increase, family responsibilities grow, and retirement planning sometimes gets pushed into the background. But time is one of the most powerful factors in building wealth. Money invested early has decades to grow through compound returns. Money invested later has much less time to multiply, which is why starting even with small amounts can make a big difference over the long term. While savings determine long-term financial security, another number influences everyday financial opportunities: your credit score. Credit scores usually range from 300 to 850. Higher scores indicate that lenders consider someone a lower-risk borrower, and that can affect many parts of life: mortgage interest rates, car loan approvals, credit card limits, sometimes even apartment applications or job opportunities. The average credit score in the United States sits around 715, which falls into the good range.
That means many people are managing their credit reasonably well. But averages can be misleading. Some individuals have scores well above 750 or even 800. Others struggle with scores in the 500s or 600s. The difference between those ranges can have a major impact on borrowing costs. For example, a higher credit score might allow someone to qualify for a lower mortgage interest rate. Over the life of a home loan, that difference could mean tens of thousands of dollars saved in interest payments. And the interesting part is that maintaining a solid credit score doesn't usually require complicated strategies. Most of it comes down to a few simple habits: paying bills on time, keeping credit card balances low, avoiding excessive debt, and maintaining a long credit history. Yet, despite those simple principles, many people still struggle with debt, especially one particular type: credit card debt. Credit cards can be incredibly convenient. They allow people to make purchases quickly, track expenses easily, and sometimes earn rewards. But when balances aren't paid off in full each month, they can also become one of the most expensive forms of borrowing. On average, households carry around $9,000 in credit card debt, and the interest rates attached to those balances can be extremely high. Many credit cards charge 20% interest or more. To understand how significant that is, consider this simple example. A $9,000 balance at 20% interest could generate about $1,800 in interest charges every year if the debt isn't paid down quickly. That's money disappearing without creating any lasting value. Unlike a mortgage that builds home equity, or even a student loan that funds education, credit card debt often comes from everyday purchases: clothing, dining out, electronics, online shopping, small purchases that seemed harmless at the time, but accumulated over months or years. And once interest begins compounding, the balance can become difficult to escape. Debt doesn't always feel dangerous in the beginning. A few $100s here, a few thousand there, monthly payments that seem manageable. But over time, those payments reduce financial flexibility. Instead of income going towards savings, investments, or future goals, it goes toward paying interest. And the more debt someone carries, the harder it becomes to build long-term wealth. This is why many financial experts recommend tackling high-interest debt before focusing heavily on investing, because eliminating a 20% interest burden can sometimes provide a bigger financial benefit than earning investment returns. In other words, reducing debt can be one of the fastest ways to improve financial health. When we step back and look at all these numbers together, a clear pattern begins to appear. Many people earn reasonable incomes, but spending pressures, debt, and low savings rates prevent them from building strong financial security. And that leads us to one of the most important numbers of all, the number that represents a person's entire financial position in a single snapshot. Net worth tells us how much someone truly owns after subtracting everything they owe. And the numbers behind it reveal something fascinating about the financial lives of most people. Because when we break net worth down by age group, the differences become enormous. Some people build wealth steadily over time. Others struggle to accumulate assets. And the reasons behind those differences can teach us a lot about how financial success actually happens. But to understand that fully, we need to take a deeper look at how net worth evolves throughout a person's life. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. In the previous section, we talked about retirement savings, credit scores, and the growing problem of credit card debt. And one thing probably stood out. Many people earn decent money, yet their financial situation still feels fragile. That's because income alone doesn't tell the full story. There's another number that reveals much more about someone's financial health. A number that takes everything into account. Assets, debt, savings, investments, property, everything. That number is called net worth. And once you understand how net worth works, it becomes much easier to see the big picture of your financial life. Net worth is actually a very simple concept. It's the difference between what you own and what you owe. First, you add up the value of everything you own. This might include your home, your car, money in bank accounts, retirement accounts, investments, or other valuable assets. Then you subtract everything you owe. That includes mortgages, credit card balances, student loans, car loans, personal loans, whatever. Whatever number remains after that calculation is your net worth. If the number is positive, it means your assets are greater than your debts. If the number is negative, it means your debts outweigh what you own. Many people focus heavily on income, but net worth is often a much better indicator of long-term financial stability. Because someone earning a high salary but carrying large debts may actually have a very small net worth. Meanwhile, someone with a moderate income who saves consistently may quietly build substantial wealth over time. When economists look at financial data across the country, they estimate that the median net worth of households is roughly around $120,000. But just like with income, that number can be misleading without context. Because net worth changes dramatically depending on age. Someone in their early 20s is unlikely to have the same financial position as someone in their 60s, which is why it's more helpful to look at net worth by age group. For younger adults, net worth is often quite low. Many people in their 20s are just starting their careers. They might still be paying off student loans, they may not yet own property, and their investment accounts are often small. In fact, people under the age of 35 often have a median net worth around $10,000 to $15,000. That might seem surprisingly low, but it makes sense when you consider that this stage of life usually involves building a financial foundation. This is when people begin establishing careers, learning how to manage money, and starting their first savings accounts. The key factor during this stage isn't how large the net worth number is, it's the habits being built. Because the financial habits developed in your 20s can shape the next several decades. As people move into their 30s and 40s, net worth typically begins to grow faster. Careers are often more stable, salaries may increase, some individuals purchase homes, others begin investing more seriously for retirement. By the time people reach their mid-30s to mid-40s, median net worth often rises to around $90,000 or more. At this stage, the compounding effect of saving and investing begins to play a larger role. Retirement accounts may start growing more noticeably. Home equity can increase as mortgages are gradually paid down, and consistent saving habits begin to accumulate meaningful financial progress. However, this stage of life can also include new financial pressures. Home equity can increase as mortgages are gradually paid down, and consistent saving habits begin to accumulate meaningful financial progress. However, this stage of life can also include new financial pressures. Raising children, paying for education, supporting family members, managing larger housing expenses, all of these responsibilities can slow down wealth accumulation if spending rises faster than income.
For many households, the peak earning years occur in the 50s and early 60s. By this time, individuals have often spent decades in the workforce. Retirement accounts have had years to grow. Mortgages may be significantly reduced or completely paid off. As a result, median net worth often climbs into the $200,000 range or higher for households approaching retirement. At this stage, financial decisions begin shifting from accumulation toward preparation. People begin asking new questions. How much money will I need in retirement? How long will my savings last? When should I stop working? These questions become increasingly important as retirement approaches. While income and investment returns matter, one of the biggest factors influencing net worth is actually very simple: savings rate. In other words, how much of your income do you consistently set aside rather than spend? Data suggests that the average savings rate in the United States is around 6% of income after taxes. At first glance, that might not sound too bad, but when you think about long-term goals, it becomes clear that 6% often isn't enough. Retirement alone may require saving 10 to 15% of income over several decades, and that's just one financial goal. People may also want to save for emergency funds, home purchases, education, major life expenses, unexpected events. When savings rates remain low, it becomes much harder to build meaningful wealth over time. One of the most powerful forces in personal finance is compound growth. This happens when investment returns generate additional returns over time. Imagine someone investing a small amount each month for decades. At first, progress might seem slow, but over time, those investments begin generating returns, and those returns begin generating their own returns. Eventually, the growth becomes exponential. The key ingredient in that process is time. Starting early allows investments to compound for many years. Starting later requires larger contributions to achieve the same result. This is why financial advisors often emphasize the importance of beginning to invest as early as possible, even if the amounts are small. Consistency matters more than perfection. If you compare households over time, you'll notice something interesting. The people who build wealth the fastest often share similar habits. They tend to spend less than they earn, avoid high-interest debt, invest regularly, increase their savings as income rises, and perhaps most importantly, they stay consistent for many years. Wealth accumulation rarely happens overnight. It's usually the result of thousands of small financial decisions made over decades. And the difference between average results and exceptional results often comes down to those daily habits. After seeing these numbers, a new question naturally appears. If the average person saves around 6% of their income, if many households carry thousands of dollars in credit card debt, and if retirement savings are often relatively small, then what does it actually take to do better than average? Do you need an extremely high income? Do you need special investment knowledge? Or is there a simpler path that most people overlook? Because when you look closely at the data, something surprising appears. Outperforming the average financially is often much easier than people think, but it requires a slightly different mindset about money and a few key habits that most people unfortunately ignore. So in the final section, we're going to talk about exactly how someone can position themselves ahead of the average financially, and how small decisions today can create a dramatically different financial future over time.
After looking at all these numbers, income, spending, savings rates, debt levels, and net worth, one thing becomes very clear. The average person's financial situation is not nearly as strong as many people assume. Many households earn reasonable incomes, but a large portion of that income gets consumed by everyday expenses. Savings rates remain relatively low, debt is common, and retirement planning often gets delayed until much later in life. But here's the interesting part. These statistics shouldn't make you feel discouraged. In fact, they should do the opposite. Because when you look closely at the numbers, something surprising appears. It's actually not that difficult to outperform the average financially. You don't need to be a millionaire entrepreneur. You don't need to invent the next big technology company. And you don't need to earn a massive six-figure salary. Often, doing better than average simply means avoiding the financial mistakes that many people make repeatedly. When people imagine building wealth, they often think it requires dramatic changes, huge investments, risky business ventures, or extreme sacrifices. But the reality is often much simpler. Financial success usually comes from being slightly better than average in several areas at the same time. For example, earning a little more than the median income, spending a little less than the average household, saving slightly more than the typical savings rate, avoiding unnecessary debt, and investing consistently over time. Each of these improvements might seem small individually, but when they happen together, the long-term effect can be enormous because money compounds, and so do financial habits. One of the most powerful financial principles is also one of the simplest: spend less than you earn. It sounds obvious, but many households struggle to maintain this basic rule. Lifestyle inflation often plays a major role. As people earn more money, their spending tends to increase as well. A nicer apartment, a newer car, more dining out, more subscriptions, more travel. Individually, these upgrades might feel reasonable, but over time, they can quietly absorb every dollar of income growth. The result is that someone earning $70,000 may feel just as financially stretched as someone earning $40,000, not because their income is too low, but because their expenses rose alongside it. One way to avoid this trap is to allow lifestyle improvements gradually while directing part of every raise towards savings or investments. Even small adjustments can make a large difference over decades. Earlier, we mentioned that the average savings rate is around 6% of income after taxes, but many financial experts recommend saving closer to 10 to 15%, particularly for long-term goals like retirement. At first, increasing savings might feel difficult, but there are several ways to make the process easier. One effective strategy is automatic saving. When money is automatically transferred into savings or investment accounts, it removes the temptation to spend it. Another strategy is increasing savings gradually. Instead of jumping from 6% to 15% immediately, someone might increase their savings rate by 1 or 2% each year. Over time, that gradual approach can lead to substantial progress without feeling overwhelming. Another powerful step toward financial improvement is reducing high-interest debt. Credit card balances, in particular, can create a serious obstacle to building wealth. When interest rates exceed 20%, carrying debt becomes extremely expensive. Every dollar spent on interest is a dollar that can't be saved or invested. For many people, eliminating credit card balances can be one of the fastest ways to improve their financial situation. Once that burden disappears, the same money previously used for interest payments can be redirected towards savings or investments.
Saving money is important, but investing allows that money to grow. Over long periods of time, investments in diversified assets, such as stock index funds, have historically produced higher returns than traditional savings accounts. Of course, investments can fluctuate in the short term. Markets rise and fall, economic conditions change. But over decades, consistent investing has historically rewarded patient investors. This is where the concept of compound growth becomes incredibly powerful. Money invested today can generate returns. Those returns generate additional returns, and over time, the growth begins accelerating. Someone investing modest amounts consistently for 30 or 40 years may accumulate far more wealth than someone who waits until later in life to start investing larger amounts. Again, the key factor is time and consistency. When people look at wealthy individuals, they often assume those outcomes resulted from dramatic events: a lucky investment, a sudden business success, a large inheritance. But in many cases, wealth develops through something far less dramatic: thousands of small decisions repeated over many years. Choosing to save instead of spend, choosing to invest instead of delay, choosing to avoid unnecessary debt, choosing to live slightly below one's means. Individually, those choices may feel insignificant, but together they can produce a powerful compounding effect. One of the biggest reasons people struggle financially is simple. They never learn what the typical numbers actually look like. Without that awareness, it's easy to assume that everyone else has their finances completely under control. But the data tells a different story. Many people feel uncertain about their financial future. Many households carry significant debt, and many individuals reach retirement without the resources they expected. Understanding these statistics doesn't mean judging anyone. Instead, it provides a clearer perspective. It helps people recognize what behaviors lead to better outcomes, and it shows that improving financial habits today can create meaningful changes over time. Instead of comparing lifestyles, there's a better question to ask. Not, does someone else appear wealthier than me, but am I making financial progress year after year? Progress might mean saving a little more this year than last year, paying down debt faster than before, increasing investment contributions, learning more about personal finance. Even small improvements count, because over long periods, small improvements compound just like money does. After everything we've covered in this video, income, spending, savings, debt, retirement, and net worth, the most important lesson might be this. The average financial path isn't necessarily the path you want to follow. If the average household saves only a small portion of income, if many people carry thousands of dollars in credit card debt, and if retirement savings are often limited, then simply avoiding those patterns can already put you ahead. Financial success doesn't require perfection, it requires consistency. And the earlier those habits begin, the more powerful the results can become. Your financial future isn't determined by the averages we discussed today. Those numbers simply show where many people currently stand. But your outcome depends on the decisions you make going forward, the choices you make with each paycheck, the habits you build around saving and investing, the discipline you maintain over time. And the good news is that every small step in the right direction matters, because money compounds, but so do better financial habits. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit the like button. And if you enjoy learning about money, investing, and building long-term wealth, consider subscribing for more videos like this. Because understanding how money really works is one of the most powerful skills you can develop. And the sooner you start applying that knowledge, the more options you'll have in the future.